Welcome in, everyone. It's another edition of Orange and Blue today, presented by Champ Honda. It is Cecil Lammey. It is Andrew Mason, and we're doing our position previews, Mace, as we go through the offseason. This will be a big piece of what we do. And of course, we're starting with quarterbacks today, but I'm looking forward to jumping into this series along with our what ifs. But the position previews, there's a lot to get to here.
There is, and we're going to do things to their most minute detail. I mean, we're going to have a day, not an offensive line day, but we're going to have an offensive tackle day, and we're going to have an interior O-line day. Probably the only thing that we're not really kind of breaking out in anything specific is we're taking special teams, generally speaking. I know that makes you very happy, Cecil. I could do a punter show. I could do a kicker show. I could do a return show, but we'll cram those all into one, and we're kind of burning those off over the holidays. But yeah, we are going to get to everything here over the next few weeks. Count you down to training camp. I mean, we're under a month now. We can really start counting down to practice here.
Yeah, you can taste it, and Broncos country be excited because you're going to see actual football now at Centura Health Training Center.
Good catch.
I almost said something else. Yeah, exactly. So let's start with the quarterback position now. I broke this down on Denver Sports Tonight. I'm writing about it at denversports.com. But Mace, I had 3 things for Russell Wilson to work out this year. Number 1, listen to Sean Payton. Number 2, protect himself better, stay healthy. And number 3, have fun. I don't think I had a lot of fun last year, but let's break into it. What happens, if Russell Wilson gets it? We'll talk later about what happens if he doesn't.
If he gets it, the sky's the limit for this team. I mean, if he gets it and he's playing, I wouldn't even say back to his Seattle apex, but maybe just at a pretty good level, you're talking about him being at worst a top 12 quarterback. And with a top 12 quarterback, with Sean Payton as the head coach, with what you assume is going to be a pretty good defense, what you hope is going to be a good set of skill position players, although Bill Barnwell would disagree in his recent skill position rankings. You'd look at that and say, all right, if Russell Wilson is a top 12 quarterback, this team is a playoff team, maybe not a division championship winning team because of the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, but it's a playoff team. And it's a team that can get into the postseason and actually will have a chance to go do some damage. Put it this way. If Russell Wilson's a top 12 quarterback, I don't think there's any playoff matchup that you'd be looking at for this Bronco team and saying, they got no shot. You'd say they've got a chance, no matter who they play, no matter where they play.
Right. And if we go through of how Russell Wilson gets this, because I believe, as I believe you, Sean Payton will get the best out of Russell Wilson. Well, what is the best now? And how does that look? How does he get there? My first key was just do what Sean Payton tells you to do, dude. And no improvisation unless you need to. Don't slough him off like you did Pete Carroll, allegedly, or whatever I have to say. But I think Sean Payton's got the best plan in place for Russell Wilson.
Right. Now, the question is on the improvisation, when can he get to that? Because you could argue that last year, until those final 2 games where Justin Alton and Jerry Rosberg kind of took the checks off Russell Wilson and let him more quickly get through his progressions to where he could start freelancing. Is it going to look more like that, or is it going to be kind of going through 5-6 levels before the improv comes into play? I expect it's going to look more like it did the last couple of games in the season, where you're talking about Russ having a couple of reads that he's looking at right away. And we know how Sean Payton's offense favors those quick slants. Okay. So you're looking at plays where that's a quick option. The screen is a quick option. And then you get past that and then you get to the improv. So I think we'll see improv happening earlier from Russell Wilson in terms of the progression of the play than it did for most of last year. It'll expose him a little bit more to hits, and that's something I know we're going to get into as this show goes on, because you can't ignore the physicality that will probably be something he's going to have to absorb, and you can't ignore his age. He'll be 35 later this year. But I think we're going to get to the things that Russell Wilson does well beyond the structure of the play design. I think you'll see in this offense, he'll get to them quicker than he was doing so with Nathaniel Hackett.
Would you call it planned improvisation? Is that an
Yeah.
oxymoron? Is that a thing? Like it's like, okay, 1, 2, go. Russ, do your
Right.
thing.
1, 2, figure it out. Okay. Because yeah, I think that's probably what we're going to end up seeing here. I think a failure of last year's offense for most of the season was that they were going for this structure that was too deep, too complex, and kept him as a statue in the pocket. And we saw even in those last couple of games, okay, Russ wasn't in the physical condition that maybe he'd been in earlier in his career. And certainly he looks, you can tell he's lost some weight. You can see that in his face when he's up there for press conferences. Take a look at the pictures, the before and after. He looks like he has lost weight. But even last year, physically not being maybe where he hoped he could be or where the Broncos wanted him to be, when they changed things in the last couple of games to get him to the beyond structure improvisation, he looked like he had his entire career. I mean, look, if you look at that Chargers game and when he gets outside of the pocket and he's beyond the play structure and he's hitting Jerry Jeudy deep, I'd put that up with anything he did in Seattle as far as a single deep strike that he's making happen on his own by going beyond the play structure. So it was there, even though Russ wasn't in the top condition that he appears to be right now. So that tells me that's going to be there if the Broncos are running that this year.
I know it's a position preview for quarterbacks, Mace, but I also feel like the ground game should be tied in here because I've often called the NFL like the department of influence. You're trying to influence the opponent.
You can't
They're
spell
going
influence without NFL, you know.
Exactly. I can't spell period, but either way, like you got to run in this offense. And I think 2021 Saints vibes. If anyone wants to kind of get a feel for what this team could be, that's a very efficient Jameis Winston, but it's also backed up by a very strong ground game.
Right. I mean, if Jameis doesn't tear his ACL 7 games into that season, you know, we do our what ifs. There's a what if for you right there. Does Sean Payton leave New Orleans? If they go 12-5 with Jameis Winston, which is they looked like an 11 or 12 win team early that season with Jameis at quarterback doing exactly what Sean Payton was telling him to do. It's different for Jameis. It's different for the New Orleans Saints. Maybe even Tampa Bay's season. Maybe they don't. Maybe Tampa Bay doesn't win the NFC South that year. Maybe the Saints do. And maybe Sean Payton is looking at his own future a little bit differently and deciding to run it back with New Orleans. And maybe he's not the coach of the Broncos right now. You've changed an awful lot. But that does give you an idea of what it's going to look like. Yes, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, 2 different types of quarterbacks, 2 different skill sets. But as far as getting the ball out quickly, being decisive, setting him up for a relatively safe, move the chains, efficient option right there from the get-go, that's what I think you're going to see in this offense. And the run game is going to set that up too, because it means that you're good, that accounting for the run means you're going to have some more open areas, short, intermediate, which, as we'll get into when we discuss wide receivers, it opens it up for somebody to maybe become, maybe not the Michael Thomas level, but be a slant god light in this game.
I love that. Slant god light and
Yes.
like a Marcus Colston.
I like it, and it's light. Yes.
Yes, that's right. Oh, so getting the best out of Russell Wilson as we preview this before we get into what if it doesn't work, and we'll talk about Jarrett Stidham.
Yeah.
What do you need to see in training camp? What's going to tip the scales for you to be like, Russ is getting it? Again, we're not talking about what we've seen, but what do you need to see going forward? What do fans need to see at training camp?
Well, watch the situational work, watch the third down. I would actually say this to fans. As you're evaluating Russell Wilson, bring your binoculars and before each play, take a note of the down and distance on the chains, okay? Because not all pass plays are created equal. That's a good sound effect right there. It's not, they're not all created equal, okay? So if you're watching on 3rd and 5 and you're seeing things go wrong, be concerned with that. But if you're watching 3rd and 5 and you're seeing like a 6-yard slant to Tim Patrick to move the chains, and you're seeing that over and over, and you're seeing him take what's there, I think that's the kind of thing you can get very excited about when you watch this offense.
Yeah, you can get really excited about that. And for whatever reason, and Russ needs to protect himself better. We've both brought that up. He does need to have fun. And we'll look at everything. So everything includes, what if Jarrett Stidham has to play a handful of games? And I would guess, I don't know what the over-under would be, Mace, but I would guess Stidham gets in for a game or two this year. I don't encourage fans to think that there's anything more than that with Jarrett Stidham.
Yeah. I'll leave the door open for him to improve with time with Sean Payton. But I would also say this: when you're looking at Stidham, don't just note how well he played against the 49ers in his first start for the Raiders last season. Look what happened a week later when the Chiefs had film to go on and could adequately prepare for Stidham, because they took advantage of some issues that Stidham has. His processor isn't as fast as you would like. And I believe the Chiefs sacked Stidham 6 times in that Week 18 game in Las Vegas last January. And some of those sacks were on Stidham not reading things quickly, not getting the ball out quickly enough. That, frankly, I think Jarrett Garantano sometimes was delivering the ball quicker, as we saw in practice, than Jarrett Stidham did. Now, sometimes he'll throw some nice balls, but he's a very typical backup, I think. It's the consistency. It's not that he doesn't have those clubs in his bag. It's that when he pulls them out, they don't always send the ball where he wants it to go, ideally. And that's the thing that I think you have to be mindful of with Jarrett Stidham. And the goal for Sean Payton, if he wants to get something out of Jarrett Stidham, is to have him be more consistent. We obviously can't get into the details of what we saw in OTAs, but to date, I don't think either you or I saw that in the practices we did see.
You think it's a trust thing? Trusting himself? Because
Maybe.
Jarrett Stidham is not a dummy, okay? And usually processor's code for talking about quarterbacks that aren't smart. We talk about someone who's a faster processor.
But that's
it can be. It can be. But Stidham, I don't think it is.
I think it's book smart versus street smart. Like
yes.
Like
I think he's book smart.
Yeah. You can be exceptionally smart at knowing the offense and everything in the classroom. And I think Jarrett Stidham, by all accounts, is very good at that aspect of it. But getting out there at full speed when the chaos is surrounding you, that's where things can kind of hold up, and you can kind of maybe get lost in your own headspace a little bit. And so I would say for Jarrett Stidham, I think he's got to get past that. It's not that it can't happen. I mean, again, we're talking about Jameis Winston here a couple of years ago, and there was a lot to fix with Jameis Winston.
30 for 30.
Right. And Sean Payton, by and large, appeared to do that and turn Jameis into a different kind of quarterback before the untimely ACL injury. But I also counsel this: when he got in the starting lineup in 2021, he'd been working with Sean Payton for a year. So it took a year to get him to that point where we saw some real functional changes that turned him into a quarterback who still might be a viable starter. And with Jarrett Stidham, you're talking about somebody who didn't start at as high a level as Jameis Winston did. So there's more work involved because he's coming from here, whereas Jameis Winston's coming from here.
He's got to play catch up. And I like the way that you put it, street smarts compared to book smarts, because with Stidham and me, again, not saying what we've seen, he just doesn't trust his eyes yet. Like, trust it, baby, rip it. Like, I don't think it's processor like, boy, he doesn't know what he's looking at. I think he knows what he's looking at, and then he thinks about it too much, and he's like, his anticipation isn't there.
Right.
Trust himself, it'll be there.
And that's the thing, the processor, sometimes it's about just making that decision quickly. And I think when I watch Jarrett Stidham, sometimes what I see a little bit of on the field is paralysis by analysis.
Yes.
That's what he's got to get past. You put it perfectly. Sometimes you just got to rip it and you got to trust it. And the thing is, this offense will be set up for you to make a quick decision and have somebody be open. We talked about that with Russell Wilson. Those those first two steps in the progression. Somebody's going to be open almost all the time. There's going to be a look that's there. And Jarrett Stidham, I think, has got to settle in and trust that and realize that. And if he can, then he can flourish in this offense. But that's a big if.
And he's got 2 years because of the 2-year contract. We'll make that assumption. And I will say this, since we're doing position previews and you brought up Garantano, like Ben DiNucci is almost all street smarts.
Yeah.
So like, and I'm not saying the book smarts aren't there, but with DiNucci, just like rip, but just like bam, like just peppering passes. They're not all good.
Yeah.
They can get picked off. But you see the difference. You see Stidham like seeing everything, reading everything, holding it too long. DiNucci's, Ben DiNucci's like, bam, I'm just gonna hit it.
It's like with Jarrett Stidham, you get the feeling sometimes he's waiting for that perfect window to throw to.
Yes.
Whereas we watch Ben DiNucci and we'll see him try to squeeze it in some tight windows, and you're watching like, whoa! And that, if you go back and watch his Seattle Sea Dragons film from the XFL, you see that as well. He led the XFL in touchdown passes. He also led in interceptions. He's trying to jam it in there. He has that gunslinger mentality, and he believes he can make every throw. And then to kind of move it to Jarrett Garantano, the other quarterback in there. So it'd be Garantano and DiNucci battling for the number 3. Garantano doesn't have that gunslinger in terms of believing he can make every throw, but I will say he does have a really strong arm. You watch him throw the ball, it comes out with a lot of hot sauce on it. Like that, you can see why George Payton wanted to give him a look. He's got some natural ability where you say, okay, let's see where he can go. But at the same time, DiNucci's willingness to get it in there, and DiNucci will make some throws that, frankly, Jarrett Stidham and Jarrett Garantano won't make. That may endear him to Sean Payton in terms of getting the number 3 job. Stidham is going to be the number 2, but it's going to be a feisty competition for the number 3.
Wild horses. In talking what fans should look for at training camp to maybe tie a bow on it, Mace, I kind of want to see picks. I want to see interceptions. I want to see Russell Wilson specifically testing the defense, learning the offense, and learning from his mistakes. Like you know who threw a lot of interceptions in camp? Peyton Manning.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Who didn't like throw interceptions in camp?
Teddy Bridgewater.
Case Keenum, remember?
Case Keenum, yeah.
Case Keenum, like, oh, he hasn't thrown a pick in practice. And everyone's like, wow, it's because he wasn't testing the limits.
Right.
Peyton would have some 3-4 interception days out there because he was testing not only what he could get away with, but what his receivers could go up and get. That first summer, it was all about figuring out what can the late Demaryius Thomas do? What can Eric Decker do? He knew what Stoke could do because he'd worked with him in Indianapolis, but he was figuring out the limits of what Decker and DT could do, what they could go get, how tight the window had to be. And yeah, there were some picks, but then you get to the season, and because he's worked on that and figured out what window works for them and what window doesn't, then he knew exactly what he could do and what he could get away with those guys. And the results were, well, they speak for themselves.
And
so I want to see Russell Wilson doing that. And again, watch the game situation. Okay, look, if it's move the ball and it's 3rd and 18 and Russ is trying to make a play and he gets picked, you know what? That's okay. I mean, it's don't go crazy about that. He's trying to make something happen. If it's 1st and 10 and there's a minute 30 on the clock and he's back at his own 35 and he gets picked off trying to throw an out to the sideline, that's the kind of thing you get worried about. So when you go out to practice, watch training camp, look at the down and distance, look at the situation on the clock. You'll see it displayed on the other side. There's a big scoreboard there on the main building across from where you're sitting on the hillside. Take note of that, and I think you'll have a better idea of how Russell Wilson and these quarterbacks really are doing as you watch him work.
Take note of our position previews here on Orange and Blue today. We're presented by Sean Honda. And of course, you can check out the written ones at denversports.com. He is Andrew Mason. I am Cecil Lammey. The off-season content doesn't stop, and we roll on with position previews coming up next. And stay frosty.